At Jacob's 45th birthday party, surrounded by his colleagues and friends, he raised his wine glass and declared me his biggest mistake to a room full of laughter. I sat there, humiliated, as everyone clinked glasses to toast his brutal honesty. But I had brought something with me that night, a simple manila folder tucked discreetly in my purse. What was inside would show everyone in that room what real mistakes actually looked like. The Riverside Country Club buzzed with conversation as Jacob's birthday celebration reached its peak. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in navy linen, and the scent of expensive cologne mixed with the aroma of prime rib from the dinner buffet. This was Jacob's crowd: corporate executives, golf buddies, and their perfectly polished wives who spoke in measured tones about charity galas and vacation homes. I watched from table 7, relegated to the overflow seating with spouses I barely knew, while Jacob held court at the head table. At 52, he still commanded attention when he entered a room. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his custom-tailored suit impeccable, and his confidence magnetic. This was the man I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago, back when that confidence felt like strength rather than arrogance. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jacob's voice boomed across the private dining room as he stood, wineglass in hand. The chatter died instantly. He had that effect on people. When Jacob spoke, everyone listened. "Thank you all for celebrating another year of my questionable life choices." Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, my fingers instinctively moving to the manila folder resting in my lap, hidden beneath the white tablecloth. "You know," Jacob continued, his eyes scanning the room with practiced ease, 45 years on this planet has taught me a lot about decision-making. Some choices lead to success." He gestured toward his business partner Sam, who raised his glass in acknowledgement, like partnering with this brilliant man to build Morrison and Associates into the powerhouse it is today. More applause. I forced a smile, knowing what was coming next. Jacob's speeches always followed the same pattern: professional triumphs, golf achievements, and then the personal commentary that left me feeling 2 inches tall. Some choices, Jacob's voice took on a theatrical tone, lead to lessons learned, like buying that boat I never use, or trusting Harry here with the Office Fantasy Football League. Harry Brennan, Jacob's CFO, clutched his chest in mock offense as the room erupted. In laughter. "Still bitter about last season, Morrison." Jacob grinned, savoring the moment. But then his expression shifted slightly, becoming more contemplative. "And some choices make you wonder what the hell you were thinking at the FAO time." My stomach clenched. The familiar dread settled over me like a heavy blanket. "Take marriage, for instance," Jacob said, his gaze finally landing on me across the room. 15 years ago, I made what was probably my biggest mistake, convincing this woman to marry me. The room erupted in laughter and knowing chuckles. Glasses clinked as people toasted to Jacob's honesty and self-deprecating humor. I heard Maya Richardson, seated to my left, whisper to her husband, "Oh, that's terrible, but so funny." My cheeks burned as I maintained my frozen smile. This wasn't the first time Jacob had used our marriage as punchline material. At company, picnics, dinner parties, even casual gatherings with neighbors, he had perfected the art of disguising cruelty as comedy. "Because let's be honest," Jacob continued, warming to his theme, "Emily here got the raw deal. She thought she was marrying a responsible adult, and instead she got, well, me." More laughter. Someone called out, "Poor Emily," which only encouraged him further. "The woman has spent 15 years trying to turn me into husband material," Jacob said, shaking his head with exaggerated dismay. "Talk about a lost cause. She's probably sitting over there right now, wondering if it's too late to return me for store credit." The room was eating it up. I watched faces around me, people I'd hosted in my home, whose children I'd helped with school projects, whose struggles I'd listened to over coffee. They were all laughing at my expense, enjoying the spectacle of my public humiliation. But as Jacob basked in the attention, unaware that his biggest mistake was about to become his worst nightmare, I felt something shift inside me. My hand tightened around the manila folder. 15 years of documentation, 15 years of covering his tracks, fixing his errors, and saving his reputation while he took credit for everything and blamed me for nothing. Jacob raised his glass higher. So here's to poor Emily, who got stuck with damaged goods and somehow made it work anyway. To my beautiful wife, my biggest mistake and your greatest entertainment. As glasses clinked around the room and laughter filled the air, I made my decision. The folder felt heavy in my hands, weighted with truth that had been hidden for far too long. It was time to show everyone what real mistakes looked like. I remember the exact moment I realized I wasn't just a wife, but a lifeline. Jacob had been pacing our living room for 3 hours, his phone glued to his ear, sweat beading on his forehead despite the October chill. The Hartwell Industries contract, worth $2.8 million, was slipping through his fingers, and he was watching his reputation crumble in real time. "What do you mean the proposal was incomplete?" He barked into the phone, his voice cracking with desperation. "I submitted everything you requested." But I knew better. I'd seen the original proposal sitting unfinished on his home office desk for weeks. Important sections were missing. The financial projections were outdated. The timeline was unrealistic. Jacob had been too busy with golf tournaments and networking dinners to properly complete the most important bid of his career. Ronald Hartwell's assistant was polite but firm on the other end of the line. The proposal deadline had passed. Hartwell Industries would be moving forward with other candidates. Jacob's company, Morrison & Associates, was officially out of the running. When Jacob finally hung up, he collapsed onto our leather couch, his head in his hands. "I'm finished, Emily. 15 years of building this company and I've just destroyed everything." I watched him from the kitchen doorway, my heart breaking despite everything. This was the man I'd married. Brilliant, ambitious, but fundamentally careless with details. He was a visionary who could see the big picture but consistently missed the critical elements that made success possible. "Maybe there's still time," I said quietly, moving to sit beside him. "Maybe if you called Mr. Hartwell directly." "It's over," Jacob interrupted, his voice hollow. "They're making the final decision tomorrow morning. Sam's been trying to reach other contacts all day, but everyone knows we lost the Hartwell bid. Our credibility is shot." That night, while Jacob drowned his sorrows at McKenna's pub with Sam and Harry, I made a decision that would define the next 15 years of my life. I drove to the Morrison & Associates office, using Jacob's keycard to access the building after hours. The office was eerily quiet as I settled into Jacob's chair and opened his computer. I'd helped him with smaller proposals before, editing presentations, checking calculations, organizing research, but this was different. This was a complete reconstruction of months of work that needed to be done in one night. I started with the financial projections, pulling up every spreadsheet Jacob had abandoned half-finished. His numbers were wildly optimistic and completely unsupported by market data. I spent 2 hours researching industry standards, consulting reports I found in the company database, and building realistic financial models that actually made sense. The timeline was next. Jacob had promised Hartwell Industries a completion date that was physically impossible given their resource constraints. I redesigned the entire project schedule, built in buffer time for unexpected delays, and created a phased approach that would actually be achievable while still meeting Hartwell's core objectives. By 3 a.m., I was working on the technical specifications, the most complex part of the proposal. Jacob had copied sections from previous bids without adapting them to Hartwell's unique requirements. I had to research Hartwell's existing infrastructure, understand their specific needs, and craft solutions that were both innovative and practical. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The sun was rising when I finally printed the revised proposal. 237 pages of meticulously researched, professionally formatted, completely original work. I'd included cost-benefit analyses Jacob had never bothered to calculate, risk assessments he'd never considered, and implementation, strategies that demonstrated deep understanding of Hartwell's business model. I drove to Hartwell Industries' corporate headquarters at 7 a.m., an hour before they opened. When Ronald Hartwell's assistant arrived, I was waiting in the lobby with the proposal and a carefully worded cover letter, explaining that Morrison and Associates had identified some critical errors in their original submission and wanted to provide a corrected version for consideration. I thought the deadline had passed, the assistant said, eyeing me suspiciously. It has, I replied calmly. This isn't a new submission. It's a correction of the original proposal. Mr. Morrison discovered some calculation errors that could have impacted the project outcome, and he felt it was ethically necessary to provide accurate information, even if it meant missing the formal deadline. The assistant hesitated, then took the proposal. I'll make sure Mr. Hartwell sees this, but I can't make any promises about whether it will be considered. 3 days later, Jacob received a call that changed everything. Not only had Hartwell Industries reviewed the corrected proposal, but they were so impressed with the thoroughness and attention to detail that they wanted to move forward with Morrison and Associates immediately. Jacob was ecstatic. He called everyone he knew, scheduled celebration dinners, and spent hours telling anyone who would listen about his brilliant last-minute save. He never asked how the proposal had been corrected. He never questioned where the additional research had come from. He simply accepted the victory as proof of his own capabilities. That night, as Jacob celebrated with his colleagues at the country club, I sat in our kitchen staring at the original proposal, the one that would have cost him everything. I'd saved his career, his reputation, and his company's future. But as I listened to him on the phone, taking full credit for work I'd done in secret, I realized something that would haunt me for years to come. I wasn't his partner. I was his safety net, and he would never even know it. I met Jacob Morrison on a rainy Thursday evening at Ruby's Wine Bar in downtown Portland. I was 28 then, working as a senior analyst at Brennan Financial Services, and had stopped in after a particularly brutal day of budget reviews. Jacob was sitting alone at the bar, staring into a glass of whiskey with the look of a man wrestling with decisions far bigger than his drink order. "Rough day?" I asked, settling onto the bar stool beside him. He looked up, and I was struck by his eyes, intelligent, intense, but carrying a weight that seemed too heavy for someone who couldn't have been much older than 35. "You could say that," he replied with a weary smile. "Just found out my business partner decided to take our biggest client and start his own firm." I should have seen the red flag then. The way he told the story, it was entirely the partner's betrayal, with no mention of what might have led to such a drastic decision. But Jacob had a way of making himself the wronged party in every narrative, and I was drawn to what I perceived as wounded nobility. "I'm sorry," I said genuinely. "That must feel devastating." 15 years of friendship, down the drain, Jacob continued, signaling the bartender for another whiskey. "We built Morrison and Associates from nothing. I trusted him completely." He paused, then looked directly at me. "I'm Jacob, by the way. Jacob Morrison." "Emily Parker," I replied, extending my hand. His grip was firm, confident despite the circumstances he'd just described. What followed was 3 hours of conversation that felt like 3 minutes. Jacob was charming, articulate, and passionate about his vision for growing his consulting firm. He spoke about helping businesses optimize their operations, about the satisfaction of solving complex problems, about his dream of building something meaningful. I found myself genuinely impressed by his knowledge and ambition. "The truth is," Jacob said as the bar began to empty around us, "I'm probably better off without him. Sometimes you don't realize how much dead weight you're carrying until you're forced to cut it loose." Again, I missed the warning. The casual way he dismissed someone who had presumably been important to him, the complete lack of self-reflection about his role in the partnership's failure. I heard confidence where I should have heard arrogance. Our first official date was dinner at Meridian, an upscale restaurant where Jacob insisted on ordering wine that cost more than my monthly car payment. He talked extensively about his plans to rebuild Morrison & Associates, his strategies for client acquisition, his vision for expansion into new markets. "The consulting business is all about reputation," he explained over perfectly prepared salmon. "Clients need to trust that you can deliver results, that you understand their industry, that you won't let them down. Everything I do has to reinforce that image of competence and reliability." I was fascinated by his business acumen, by his understanding of client psychology and market dynamics. What I didn't realize was that Jacob was better at talking about business than actually executing it. He could analyze a company's problems with remarkable insight, but implementing solutions required a level of detailed attention and follow-through that consistently eluded him. 6 months into our relationship, I started noticing the gaps. Jacob would describe elaborate strategies for client projects, but when I asked about timelines or specific deliverables, his answers became vague. He talked about important meetings. That never seemed to result in concrete outcomes. He mentioned potential contracts that always seemed to be in negotiation without ever reaching completion. "The Brennan account is finally moving forward," he told me one evening over dinner, at my apartment. "Harry Brennan loved my presentation on operational efficiency. We should have a signed contract within the week." But weeks passed without any mention of the Brennan contract. When I finally asked about it, Jacob waved dismissively. "Oh, they decided to postpone the project. Budget constraints. You know how it is with these corporate types. They're always changing their minds." I began to understand that Jacob's greatest skill wasn't business consulting, it was managing perceptions. He could present himself as successful and competent, while the actual substance of his work remained mysteriously elusive. He belonged to the right country club, drove the right car, wore the right clothes, and spoke with the right level of authority. But beneath the polished exterior, his business was struggling. The proposal that would change everything came exactly 1 year after we met. Jacob took me back to Ruby's wine bar, to the same spot where we'd first talked. He'd reserved the entire back section, complete with candles and a string quartet. "Emily," he said, dropping to one knee with a ring that must have cost 3 months of his actual income. "You're the most intelligent, capable, amazing woman I've ever known. I need you in my life. Will you marry me?" I said yes, of course. Was in love with his vision, his ambition, his apparent success. I believed I was marrying a brilliant businessman who just needed the right partner to help him reach his full potential. I had no idea I was actually marrying a man whose entire career would depend on my ability to quietly fix his mistakes, while he took credit for the results. Our honeymoon in Tuscany should have been perfect, but even then, Jacob's phone never stopped ringing. We were sitting at a vineyard overlooking rolling hills dotted with olive trees when his phone buzzed for the 15th time that morning. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," Jacob said, already reaching for the device. "It's probably Sam. The Henderson project is in a critical phase." I watched him pace between the grapevines, gesticulating wildly as he spoke. When he returned 20 minutes later, his face was flushed with frustration. "Crisis?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The Henderson people are threatening to pull out," Jacob said, running his hands through his hair. "Apparently there are some discrepancies in our cost projections. Sam's been trying to handle it, but..." He trailed off, looking genuinely distressed. I could have let it go. We were on our honeymoon after all. But seeing Jacob's obvious anxiety, and knowing how much the Henderson account meant to Morrison and Associates' future, I made an offer that would set the pattern for our entire marriage. "Why don't you forward me the files?" I suggested. "I can take a look while you're at the spa this afternoon." Jacob's relief was immediate and profound. "You would do that? On our honeymoon?" "We're a team now," I replied, meaning every word. "Your success is my success." That afternoon, while Jacob enjoyed a massage and wine tasting, I sat in our hotel room with my laptop, reviewing Morrison and Associates' Henderson proposal. The discrepancies weren't minor calculation errors. They were fundamental flaws in the project scope and resource allocation. Jacob had underestimated the complexity of Henderson's requirements by at least 40%, which meant his cost projections were dangerously low. I spent 4 hours rebuilding the financial model, researching Henderson's industry standards, and creating realistic timelines that would actually deliver what they needed. Then I called Sam directly. "Emily?" Sam sounded surprised to hear from me. "Aren't you guys in Italy?" "We are, but Jacob told me about the Henderson situation. I've been looking at the proposal and I think I can help." Sam was initially hesitant. After all, I wasn't technically part of Morrison and Associates. But when I walked him through my revised projections and explained how we could present the changes as enhanced deliverables rather than corrections, he became enthusiastic. "This is brilliant," Sam said. "You've essentially solved all their concerns while making it look like we're offering them more value." We spent the next hour on the phone, refining the approach and preparing talking points for Sam's meeting with Henderson the following day. When Jacob returned from the spa, he found me closing my laptop with a satisfied smile. "All sorted," I announced. "Sam will present the revised proposal tomorrow, and I'm confident Henderson will be happy with the adjustments." Jacob stared at me with something approaching awe. "You fixed it? The whole thing?" "We fixed it," I corrected. "I just helped with some number crunching." The Henderson account was saved, leading to a 3-year contract worth $1.2 million. Jacob was ecstatic, and his gratitude felt genuine. For our 6-month anniversary, he surprised me with a beautiful pearl necklace and a card that read, "To my brilliant wife who makes everything possible." That became my role, the invisible problem solver, the quiet fixer, the woman who made everything possible. When the Riverside Mall project hit regulatory snags, I spent weekends researching zoning laws and building codes, finding loopholes that allowed the project to proceed. When Morrison and Associates bid for the Steinberg corporate restructuring seemed doomed due to inadequate financial analysis, I worked through 3 consecutive nights creating comprehensive reports that impressed the client so much they signed immediately. Jacob's business began to thrive, and with it, his confidence grew. He joined the Riverside Country Club, upgraded his car to a BMW, and started talking about expanding to a second office location. Morrison and Associates was being invited to bid on bigger projects, and Jacob's reputation in the consulting community was solid. "You're my secret weapon," he would tell me after each success, usually over expensive dinners to celebrate another won contract. "I don't know what I'd do without you." But I noticed something troubling in those early years. Jacob never mentioned my contributions to anyone else. When clients praised the thoroughness of his proposals, when colleagues complimented his attention to detail, when industry publications featured Morrison and Associates as an emerging firm to watch, Jacob accepted all the credit without hesitation. "How did you manage to turn around the Henderson project so quickly?" Harry Brennan asked at a networking event. "Experience," Jacob replied smoothly. "Knowing how to read between the lines of what clients really need?" I stood beside him, smiling and nodding, while he took full credit for work I'd done on our honeymoon. It stung, but I told myself it was for the greater good. We were building something together, even if only one of us was getting recognition for it. The pattern was established. Jacob would charm clients and identify opportunities, while I would quietly ensure that Morrison and Associates could actually deliver on his promises. He was the face of the company. I was its hidden foundation. For 5 years, I convinced myself that this arrangement was sustainable, that love and partnership didn't require public acknowledgement. I believed that Jacob appreciated my contributions, even if he didn't advertise them. I was wrong on both counts. The shift began subtly. The way most erosions do, so gradual you don't notice until significant damage has already occurred. It started with Jacob's promotion of Gail Stevens to senior consultant, a position I'd essentially been filling without the title, recognition, or compensation for 3 years. Gail brings fresh perspective to the team, Jacob announced at our 5th anniversary dinner at Le Bernardin, his tone suggesting this was purely a business decision made after careful consideration. She has an MBA from Northwestern and really understands the nuances of client relations. Plus, she's eager to take on more responsibility, which is exactly what we need as we expand. What he didn't mention, what he had apparently forgotten, or chosen to ignore, was that I'd been the one training Gail for 6 months, walking her through our client management systems, teaching her the nuances of proposal development that I'd perfected through years of trial and error, and sharing insights I'd gained from countless late nights solving Morrison and Associates' most complex challenges. "That's wonderful," I replied, cutting into my salmon with more force than the delicate fish required. "I'm sure she'll do well with everything she's learned during her orientation period." Jacob seemed completely oblivious to my choice of words, already moving on to discuss his ambitious plans for expanding the team, opening a satellite office in Seattle, and positioning Morrison and Associates as the premier consulting firm in the Pacific Northwest. But I noticed something troubling in how he talked about the business now. The "we" that had once included me, even if only in private conversations, had become an exclusively corporate "we" that encompassed Jacob, Sam, Harry, and now Gail. I had been quietly excised from the company's future without anyone bothering to inform me. The real sting came 2 weeks later at the Brennan Industries Annual Mixer, an upscale networking event held at the Portland Art Museum. I was standing near the Impressionist collection, waiting for our drinks, when I overheard Jacob talking, animatedly to Ronald Hartwell, the same client whose contract I'd saved during our crisis years earlier. "Morrison, you've really built something impressive here," Hartwell was saying, gesturing with his wineglass toward the assembled crowd of Portland's business elite. "That last proposal your team submitted for our warehouse optimization project was exceptionally thorough. The level of detail, the innovative logistics solutions. Who's your lead analyst on those kinds of complex operational challenges?" "That would be Gail Stevens," Jacob replied without hesitation, his voice carrying that confident authority that had first attracted me to him years ago. "Brilliant woman. Absolutely brilliant. She has this incredible ability to identify potential problems before they become critical issues, to see solutions that others miss completely." I nearly dropped my wine glass, the crystal stem slipping in my suddenly sweaty palm. Gail had been with the company for 8 months. The proposal Hartwell was praising, the one that had apparently impressed him so much that Brennan Industries was considering expanding their contract, had been my work. 47 pages of meticulously researched financial projections, risk assessments, and implementation strategies that I'd completed during a weekend while Jacob played in a golf tournament in Palm Springs. "I'd love to meet her," Hartwell continued, clearly impressed by what he perceived as Jacob's talent for identifying and developing exceptional employees. "Maybe we could set up a lunch meeting to discuss some of our upcoming expansion projects. Her approach to operational efficiency could be exactly what we need." "Absolutely," Jacob said with the enthusiasm of someone closing an important deal. "Gail would be thrilled to meet with you. She's always excited to take on new challenges, especially ones that let her showcase her analytical capabilities." I stood frozen behind a Monet water lily painting, watching my husband casually hand over credit for my work to someone else. Not just the work itself, but the opportunity to build relationships with major clients based on that work. When Jacob finally noticed me approaching with his scotch, his smile was easy and comfortable, showing no awareness that he'd just committed an act of professional theft. "There you are, sweetheart," he said, accepting the drink without acknowledgement, or thanks. "Ronald and I were just discussing some exciting opportunities for the firm." "So I heard," I managed, my voice carefully neutral despite the fury building in my chest. The pattern accelerated after that incident like a cancer spreading through our professional relationship. At company meetings I wasn't invited to attend, Jacob would present strategies I'd developed as collaborative team efforts. Client testimonials praising Morrison & Associates' attention to detail and innovative solutions became evidence of the company's collective expertise, with no mention of the countless nights I'd spent perfecting those details and developing those innovations in our home office while Jacob attended networking dinners. "Emily, you should be so proud," Sam told me at Jacob's birthday celebration that year, his genuine admiration making the irony even more painful. "Your husband has really found his stride. The quality of our work has improved dramatically over the past few years. It's like he's developed this sixth sense for exactly what clients need." I smiled and nodded, swallowing the bitter irony that threatened to choke me. The quality had indeed improved dramatically, because I was doing an increasing percentage of the actual analytical work, while Jacob focused on relationship building and business development. But somehow, my growing contribution had become invisible, absorbed into the company's general success without attribution or acknowledgement. "He's always been brilliant," I replied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth, each syllable a small betrayal of the truth. That night, lying in bed beside Jacob as he scrolled through emails on his phone, probably responses to the proposal I'd written earlier that week, I tried to broach the subject as carefully as possible. "I noticed Ronald Hartwell mentioned the Brennan proposal tonight." Jacob murmured, still focused on his screen, his attention divided between my words and whatever business crisis was unfolding in his inbox. "Great project. Really showcased what the team can do when everyone brings their A-game." "The team," I repeated slowly, testing the word like a foreign language I was trying to learn. "Exactly. It's amazing what we can accomplish when everyone contributes their strengths and works toward a common goal." I waited for him to acknowledge my specific contribution, to mention the weekend I'd spent rebuilding his inadequate financial models, researching Brennan's operational requirements, and developing the innovative solutions that had impressed Hartwell so much. But Jacob simply continued scrolling, his mind already moving on to the next challenge, the next opportunity to showcase his supposed brilliance. That was the moment I realized with devastating clarity that I'd become a ghost in my own marriage, present enough to do the work that kept his business thriving, invisible enough to be easily overlooked when credit was distributed, convenient enough to be taken for granted indefinitely. The systematic erasure of my contributions became Jacob's specialty, executed with such casual precision that I sometimes wondered if it was deliberate manipulation or simply his natural instinct for self-preservation. The Morrison & Associates Christmas party in our 7th year of marriage provided a masterclass in how he'd perfected this devastating art. The event was held at the Portland Art Museum's Contemporary Wing, a sophisticated venue that reflected Jacob's growing status in the business community. 200 guests mingled among the installations, clients, competitors, suppliers, and the entire ecosystem of professionals who had watched Morrison & Associates evolve from a struggling two-person consultancy into one of the region's most respected firms. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jacob announced, standing before the assembled crowd with the confidence of someone who had grown accustomed to commanding attention, "I want to take a moment to recognize the incredible team that's made this our most successful year yet." I stood at the back of the room near a geometric sculpture, holding a glass of wine I'd barely touched, watching my husband bask in the attention of people who had no idea that half of Morrison & Associates' recent successes had originated from our kitchen table during my sleepless nights. The irony of my position wasn't lost on me, surrounded by abstract art while being the most abstract presence in the room. First, I want to thank Sam Rodriguez, whose strategic vision has been instrumental in our expansion into the healthcare sector, Jacob continued, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who'd delivered many such speeches. Sam's ability to identify emerging market opportunities has positioned us perfectly for the challenges ahead. Applause filled the room as Sam raised his glass with a modest smile, accepting recognition for market expansion that I'd actually mapped out during a 3-week period when Jacob was attending a series of golf tournaments disguised as business development opportunities. Harry Brennan, our CFO, whose financial acumen has kept us profitable even during the most challenging economic periods, Jacob continued seamlessly. Harry's conservative approach to resource management has given us the stability to take calculated risks that have paid off tremendously. More applause. Harry nodded graciously from his position near the bar, unaware that his conservative approach had been supplemented by my personal financial injections during several critical periods when the company's cash flow had nearly collapsed. And Gail Stevens, whose analytical skills have elevated the quality of our proposals to an entirely new level, Jacob announced with particular emphasis. Gail's attention to detail and innovative problem-solving approaches have become our signature competitive advantage. The loudest applause yet. Gail actually blushed as colleagues patted her shoulder and raised their glasses in her direction, celebrating analytical skills and innovative approaches that were actually refined versions of methodologies I'd developed and taught her during our weekly collaboration sessions. I felt hollow watching this performance, like a ghost observing her own funeral. 3 months earlier, when Morrison and Associates had been on the verge of losing their biggest healthcare client due to a catastrophic oversight in their service delivery timeline, I'd spent an entire weekend developing a crisis management strategy that not only saved the account, but resulted in a contract extension worth $800,000. Jacob had presented my solution as his own breakthrough thinking in stakeholder management. The Gail situation, as I'd started thinking of it privately, had become particularly painful to watch. She was intelligent and hardworking, genuinely deserving of recognition for her efforts, but she was essentially being credited with refining and implementing systems I'd created. When clients praised the innovative approaches in recent proposals, they were unknowingly complementing methodologies I'd developed through years of trial and error, then taught to Gail during training sessions that Jacob had insisted on so she could learn from Emily's organizational insights. Organizational insights. As if I were a filing system rather than the strategic mind behind Morrison and Associates' transformation from struggling consultancy to industry leader. Of course, Jacob continued, his voice taking on that practiced tone of affectionate condescension that had become as familiar as his cologne. None of this would be possible without the support of our families. My wife Emily keeps me grounded and organized. She's the reason I remember to eat lunch and show up to meetings on time. Behind every successful consultant is someone making sure the home front runs smoothly. Polite laughter rippled through the crowd, the kind of appreciative chuckle that audiences give when speakers acknowledge their support systems. I'd been reduced to a personal assistant, a life manager, someone whose primary contribution was ensuring Jacob's basic functioning as a human being. No mention of the Hartwell contract I'd salvaged during a single desperate night. No acknowledgement of the regulatory compliance issues I'd researched and resolved for 3 major clients. No recognition of the client relationship strategies I'd developed that had become Morrison and Associates' signature approach to account management. Maya Richardson, the wife of one of Jacob's golf partners, approached me after the speech with that sympathetic smile women give each other when they think someone needs consoling. "You must be so proud of Jacob tonight," she said warmly, her diamond earrings catching the gallery lighting. "He's built such an impressive company from practically nothing. It must be wonderful being married to someone so successful and watching him achieve all his dreams." "Yes," I replied automatically, the response I'd perfected over years of similar conversations. He's very talented. It must be nice being married to someone whose career is so established. I bet you get to enjoy all the benefits of his success without any of the day-to-day stress and pressure of running a business. I forced a smile that felt like breaking glass. Something like that. But the truth was exactly the opposite. I carried all of the stress and received none of the recognition. When clients called with urgent problems outside business hours, Jacob's phone would mysteriously go straight to voicemail. The calls would come to our home line, and I'd find myself walking clients through solutions, promising follow-up reports that I'd write myself, managing crisis communications that would preserve Morrison & Associates' reputation while Jacob remained blissfully unreachable. Mrs. Morrison, thank you so much for clarifying those implementation details. The Riverside Hospital administrator had told me just last month after a 2-hour consultation call. Your husband is lucky to have such a knowledgeable partner who understands the business so thoroughly. Partner. Even the clients understood what Jacob seemed determined to ignore, that I was far more than a supportive spouse managing his calendar and ensuring he ate properly. But Jacob had trained everyone, including me, to see my contributions as auxiliary rather than essential, helpful rather than crucial, supportive rather than foundational. That night, driving home from the Christmas party through Portland's rain-slicked streets, I tried once more to address what was happening to our partnership. That was a nice speech, I said carefully, my words measured and neutral. Thanks. I think people appreciated the recognition. It's important to acknowledge good work. It's important to acknowledge everyone's contributions, I replied, emphasizing the word everyone just enough to convey meaning without seeming confrontational. Jacob glanced at me briefly, then back at the road, his expression suggesting he'd missed my subtle emphasis entirely. Absolutely. The team works incredibly hard, and they deserve to be celebrated for their achievements. The team. Always the team. Never me. In Jacob's carefully constructed narrative, I existed in some liminal space between family and business, contributing enough to be useful, but never enough to warrant recognition, essential enough to be depended upon but invisible enough to be conveniently ignored when success needed to be distributed among the people who actually mattered. By our 10th wedding anniversary, Jacob had perfected the art of making me feel like a stranger in my own life, an outsider looking in at a marriage and business partnership that had somehow evolved without my conscious participation. The celebration dinner at Meridian, the same restaurant where we'd had our first date, should have been a moment of romantic reflection. Instead, it became another showcase of how completely he'd rewritten our shared history. The restaurant was exactly as I remembered it from a decade earlier. Intimate lighting, white tablecloths, the soft murmur of expensive conversations. But the man sitting across from me bore little resemblance to the struggling consultant I'd fallen in love with. Jacob had acquired the confident polish of success, from his perfectly tailored suit to his practiced smile. And somewhere in that transformation, I had become an inconvenient reminder of a time when he'd needed help, You believe it's been 10 years? Jacob said, raising his wine glass across the candlelit table with the theatrical flourish that had become his signature gesture. Feels like yesterday that I was this struggling consultant with big dreams and no clear idea how to make them reality. I stared at him across the flickering candle, wondering if he genuinely believed his own revisionist narrative or if he'd simply told the story so many times that fiction had become his personal truth. You weren't struggling when we met, I reminded him gently, my voice careful and measured. You'd just lost a partner, but Morrison & Associates was already established. You had clients, a reputation, a functioning business. Jacob waved dismissively, the gesture of someone brushing away inconvenient details that didn't fit his preferred story. Barely hanging on, really. The business was hemorrhaging money. I had no real systems in place, no strategic vision for growth. It wasn't until I found my stride, developed my methodologies, that things really took off. He reached across the table and patted my hand with patronizing affection. Of course, having you there to keep me organized and on track helped immensely. Organized. There was that word again, the single adjective that had come to define my entire contribution to our shared success. 15 years of strategic thinking, crisis management, and business development reduced to basic administrative support. I felt the familiar ache of diminishment, but this time it was accompanied by something sharper, a crystalline clarity, about what my marriage had become. Remember the Hartwell crisis? I asked, testing whether he recalled the night I'd literally saved his company from bankruptcy. God, yes. Jacob laughed, his expression growing animated as he warmed to one of his favorite stories. What a disaster that almost was. Thank goodness for quick thinking and good business instincts. Sometimes you just have to trust your gut and pull a rabbit out of the hat when everything seems hopeless. Your gut. Your instincts. Your rabbit. I sat there listening to my husband completely erase me from the most crucial save of his career, replacing my desperate all-night work session with his own mythologized version of entrepreneurial heroism. The waiter approached with dessert, a chocolate souffle with "Happy Anniversary" written in elegant gold script, but the sweetness felt like ash in my mouth. "Jacob," I said when he finally put down his phone after photographing the dessert, for what I assumed would be a social media post about our perfect anniversary celebration. "Do you remember what actually happened the night of the Hartwell crisis? I mean specifically, step by step, what took place?" He paused mid-bite, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth, something in my tone apparently registering as different from our usual conversations. "What do you mean, exactly?" "We worked through it together, found a solution to their objections." "Together?" "Well, I handled the strategic thinking and client psychology, the real business development work. You provided support, kept me fed and caffeinated while I worked through the night." I felt that familiar ache transform into something more dangerous, a white-hot clarity about the scope of his delusion. "Jacob, I rewrote the entire proposal. 47 pages of financial analysis, technical specifications, and implementation strategies. While you were sleeping off whiskey at McKenna's pub, I was saving your company." "Emily, you're being dramatic," he said with that patient tone, reserved for overwrought children and hysterical women. "We collaborated, sure, but let's not get carried away with facts?" I interrupted. "I spent the entire night rebuilding your financial models because yours were completely wrong. I researched Hartwell's infrastructure requirements because you'd copied irrelevant sections from other proposals. I personally delivered the corrected proposal to their headquarters the next morning while you were still unconscious." Jacob set down his fork, his voice taking on the carefully controlled tone he used when he thought I was being emotional and unreasonable. "Sweetheart, I think you're remembering things differently than they actually happened. Memory can be funny that way, especially under stress." The audacity was breathtaking. He was actually suggesting that I'd imagined my own experiences, that my memories of saving his career were stress-induced delusions. "And the Henderson project on our honeymoon?" I continued, my voice gaining strength, despite his attempts to undermine my recollection. "The Riverside Mall zoning crisis? The Steinberg restructuring proposal that won you the Consultant of the Year award? Were those collaborative efforts too? Emily, what's gotten into you tonight? This is supposed to be a celebration of our partnership, our shared journey." "I'm trying to understand how you remember our marriage," I said, my voice deadly calm, despite the storm building inside me. "Because apparently, we've lived completely different versions of the last 10 years. Jacob reached for my hand again, but I pulled away before he could touch me. "Look, I know you've been helpful over the years, very helpful, essential even. But let's not get carried away with what? With the truth about who actually built Morrison and Associates? The restaurant continued to buzz with conversation around us, couples celebrating anniversaries and birthdays, families enjoying evening meals together. None of them could see the marriage dissolving quietly at table 12, could witness the moment a woman realized she'd been married to someone who didn't actually see her as a person with independent thoughts, capabilities, and contributions. Emily, you're upset about something, and I'm not entirely sure what's triggered this, but maybe we should discuss whatever this is at home, in private. I looked at Jacob across the table, still handsome in his expensive suit, still confident. In his revised reality, still completely convinced that his version of our history was the only one that mattered. And I realized that somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being his wife and become his convenient fiction, a supporting character in the story he told about his own brilliance. The woman who'd saved his company countless times, who'd built the methodologies that made him famous, who'd sacrificed her own career ambitions to ensure his success, had been reduced to a footnote in his personal mythology. And tonight, on our 10th anniversary, I finally understood that no amount of evidence would change his mind because acknowledging my contributions would require him to admit that his entire professional identity was built on a lie. Part 5. First signs of trouble. 36-45 minutes, 800 words. The shift began subtly, the way most erosions do, so gradual you don't notice until significant damage has already occurred. It started with Jacob's promotion of Gail Stevens to senior consultant, a position I'd essentially been filling without the title, recognition, or compensation for 3 years. Gail brings fresh perspective to the team, Jacob announced at our 5th anniversary dinner at Le Bernardin, his tone suggesting this was purely a business decision made after careful consideration. She has an MBA from Northwestern and really understands the nuances of client relations. Plus, she's eager to take on more responsibility, which is exactly what we need as we expand. What he didn't mention, what he had apparently forgotten, or chosen to ignore, was that I'd been the one training Gail for 6 months, walking her through our client management systems, teaching her the nuances of proposal development that I'd perfected through years of trial and error, and sharing insights I'd gained from countless late nights solving Morrison & Associates' most complex challenges. "That's wonderful," I replied, cutting into my salmon with more force than the delicate fish required. "I'm sure she'll do well with everything she's learned during her orientation period." Jacob seemed completely oblivious to my choice of words, already moving on to discuss his ambitious plans for expanding the team, opening a satellite office in Seattle, and positioning Morrison & Associates as the premier consulting firm in the Pacific Northwest. But I noticed something troubling in how he talked about the business now. The we that had once included me, even if only in private conversations, had become an exclusively corporate we that encompassed Jacob, Sam, Harry, and now Gail. I had been quietly excised from the company's future without anyone bothering to inform me. The real sting came 2 weeks later at the Brennan Industries annual Mixer, an upscale networking event held at the Portland Art Museum. I was standing near the Impressionist collection, waiting for our drinks, when I overheard Jacob talking animatedly to Ronald Hartwell, the same client whose contract I'd saved during our crisis years earlier. "Morrison, you've really built something impressive here," Hartwell was saying, gesturing with his wine glass toward the assembled crowd of Portland's business elite. "That last proposal your team submitted for our warehouse optimization project was exceptionally thorough. The level of detail, the innovative logistics solutions. Who's your lead analyst on those kinds of complex operational challenges?" "That would be Gail Stevens," Jacob replied without hesitation, his voice carrying that confident authority that had first attracted me to him years ago. "Brilliant woman. Absolutely brilliant. She has this incredible ability to identify potential problems before they become critical issues, to see solutions that others miss completely." I nearly dropped my wine glass, the crystal stem slipping in my suddenly sweaty palm. Gail had been with the company for 8 months, The proposal Hartwell was praising, the one that had apparently impressed him so much that Brennan Industries was considering expanding their contract, had been my work. 47 pages of meticulously researched financial projections, risk assessments, and implementation strategies that I'd completed during a weekend while Jacob played in a golf tournament in Palm Springs. I'd love to meet her, Hartwell continued, clearly impressed by what he perceived as Jacob's talent for identifying and developing exceptional employees. Maybe we could set up a lunch meeting to discuss some of our upcoming expansion projects. Her approach to operational efficiency could be exactly what we need. Absolutely, Jacob said with the enthusiasm of someone closing an important deal. Gail would be thrilled to meet with you. She's always excited to take on new challenges, especially ones that let her showcase her analytical capabilities. I stood frozen behind a Monet water lily painting, watching my husband casually hand over credit for my work to someone else. Not just the work itself, but the opportunity to build relationships with major clients based on that work. When Jacob finally noticed me approaching with his scotch, his smile was easy and comfortable, showing no awareness that he'd just committed an act of professional theft. "There you are, sweetheart," he said, accepting the drink without acknowledgement, or thanks. "Ronald and I were just discussing some exciting opportunities for the firm." "So I heard," I managed, my voice carefully neutral, despite the fury building in my chest. The pattern accelerated after that incident like a cancer spreading through our professional relationship. At company meetings I wasn't invited to attend, Jacob would present strategies I'd developed as collaborative team efforts. Client testimonials praising Morrison & Associates' attention to detail and innovative solutions became evidence of the company's collective expertise, with no mention of the countless nights I'd spent perfecting those details and developing those innovations in our home office while Jacob attended networking dinners. "Emily, you should be so proud," Sam told me at Jacob's birthday celebration that year, his genuine admiration making the irony even more painful. "Your husband has really found his stride. The quality of our work has improved dramatically over the past few years. It's like he's developed this sixth sense for exactly what clients need." I smiled and nodded, swallowing the bitter irony that threatened to choke me. The quality had indeed improved dramatically, because I was doing an increasing percentage of the actual analytical work while Jacob focused on relationship building and business development. But somehow, my growing contribution had become invisible, absorbed into the company's general success without attribution or acknowledgement. "He's always been brilliant," I replied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth, each syllable a small betrayal of the truth. That night, lying in bed beside Jacob as he scrolled through emails on his phone, probably responses to the proposal I'd written earlier that week, I tried to broach the subject as carefully as possible. I noticed Ronald Hartwell mentioned the Brennan proposal tonight. Jacob murmured, still focused on his screen, his attention divided between my words and whatever business crisis was unfolding in his inbox. Great project. Really showcased what the team can do when everyone brings their A-game. The team, I repeated slowly, testing the word like a foreign language I was trying to learn. Exactly. It's amazing what we can accomplish when everyone contributes their strengths and works toward a common goal. I waited for him to acknowledge my specific contribution, to mention the weekend I'd spent rebuilding his inadequate financial models, researching Brennan's operational requirements, and developing the innovative solutions that had impressed Hartwell so much. But Jacob simply continued scrolling, his mind already moving on to the next challenge, the next opportunity to showcase his supposed brilliance. That was the moment I realized with devastating clarity that I'd become a ghost in my own marriage. Present, enough to do the work that kept his business thriving, invisible enough to be easily overlooked when credit was distributed, convenient enough to be taken for granted indefinitely. What I didn't discover until much later was the extent of Jacob's campaign to rewrite our history, not just in his own mind, but in the minds of everyone who mattered in our professional and social circles. The revelation came accidentally, through a conversation I was never meant to overhear. I was returning from the restroom at the quarterly Riverside Business Association mixer when I heard familiar voices coming from the private alcove near the bar. Jacob was deep in conversation with Ronald Hartwell and two other prominent business owners, their voices carrying that confident tone men use when discussing serious business matters. "Morrison, I have to ask," Hartwell was saying, swirling his scotch thoughtfully. "How do you consistently deliver such detailed, thorough proposals? Some of the analysis in your recent submissions has been extraordinary. The depth of research, the innovative approaches. It's like you have a crystal ball for predicting exactly what clients need." I froze behind a decorative pillar, close enough to hear every word but hidden from their view. My heart began racing as I recognized the setup for what would become another performance of Jacob's carefully crafted mythology. "It's all about having the right systems in place," Jacob replied smoothly, his voice carrying that practiced confidence I'd come to know so well. "I've spent years developing proprietary methodologies for client assessment and risk analysis. The key is understanding that details matter. You can't just wing it in this business. Every recommendation has to be backed by solid data and creative problem-solving. Proprietary methodologies." The phrase hit me like a physical blow. Those were the systems I'd created during countless late nights while he slept, the frameworks I'd developed through trial and error over 15 years of solving his clients' problems. "But the speed is what impresses me most," added Marcus Webb, CEO of Webb Industries, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. "That turnaround on our logistics proposal was remarkable. 48 hours from request to delivery, and it was more comprehensive than proposals we've seen from firms twice your size. How do you manage that kind of efficiency?" I remembered that proposal with painful clarity. Jacob had promised it without consulting anyone, then panicked when he realized Morrison and Associates had no capacity to deliver on such an aggressive timeline. I'd worked 36 straight hours, surviving on coffee and determination, researching Webb Industries' supply chain challenges, analyzing their competitor strategies, and creating a comprehensive solution that had won them their biggest contract to date. "Well," Jacob chuckled, the sound of someone comfortable in his deception, "I've learned to delegate effectively over the years. Having a strong support team is crucial in this business." "Must be nice having such capable staff," Hartwell mused, clearly impressed by what he perceived as Jacob's leadership skills. "Oh, I don't rely on staff for the strategic work," Jacob clarified quickly, and I could hear the subtle shift in his tone, the need to maintain his image as the intellectual force behind every success. "That's all me. The big picture thinking, the innovative solutions, the client psychology that requires experience and insight you can't just delegate. But you know how it is. There's always administrative support needed. My wife Emily handles a lot of the organizational details, keeps me on schedule, that sort of thing. Frees me up to focus on the big picture work that really matters. Organizational details. Administrative support. I was being described like a secretary, someone whose highest contribution was ensuring Jacob remembered his lunch appointments. The man who had privately relied on my strategic thinking for every major success of his career was publicly reducing me to a calendar manager. "Emily seems lovely," Webb commented, and I could hear genuine warmth in his voice. "Very intelligent woman. The few times we've spoken at events, she's asked remarkably insightful questions about our business challenges." My heart leaped. Finally, someone had noticed that I understood far more than Jacob ever acknowledged. But Jacob's response crushed that hope immediately. "Emily's very observant," he said with the patronizing tone of someone explaining a child's precocious behavior. "She picks up bits and pieces from listening to my phone calls and meetings. Sometimes she'll ask good questions, but she doesn't really understand the technical aspects of consulting. It's more intuitive than analytical, if you know what I mean. Women often have good instincts about people and relationships, even if they don't grasp the underlying business mechanics. Intuitive rather than analytical, as if my years of financial training, my strategic thinking, my crisis management skills were just lucky guesses rather than hard-earned expertise. As if the solutions I'd developed that had saved millions of dollars for his clients were merely feminine intuition stumbling onto correct answers. Still, Webb persisted, and I appreciated his unwillingness to dismiss me entirely. Some of those intuitive insights could be valuable in client meetings. You should consider bringing her into more of the strategic discussions. Jacob laughed, a sound that felt like a slap across my face. Trust me, Marcus, Emily's wonderful, but client meetings aren't really her thing. She gets nervous around complex business discussions, starts second-guessing herself. Much better to keep her focused on what she does best, supporting the home front so I can concentrate on building the business. What I did best, according to Jacob, was staying invisible while he claimed credit for my work. The conversation shifted to golf handicaps and vacation plans, but I remained hidden behind the pillar, processing what I'd just heard. Jacob hadn't just been taking credit for my contributions. He'd been actively undermining any possibility that others might recognize my capabilities, ensuring that I remained trapped in the role of supportive spouse, while he built an empire on my uncredited labor. The final years of our marriage became a series of increasingly desperate attempts on my part to reclaim some recognition, met with Jacob's increasingly creative ways of dismissing or redirecting my efforts. The breaking point began with what should have been my greatest professional triumph, the Cascade Medical Systems account. Morrison and Associates had been trying to land Cascade Medical for 3 years. It was the healthcare consulting contract that could transform the company from a regional player into a national firm. When Cascade finally agreed to a preliminary meeting, Jacob was beside himself with excitement. "This is it, Emily," he said, pacing our living room the night before the presentation. "This is the contract that changes everything. If we can prove we understand their operational challenges and present innovative solutions, we're looking at a 5-year deal worth over $4 million. I'd been following Cascade Medical's struggles in the industry journals for months. Their inefficiencies were well documented, but no consulting firm had successfully addressed their core problem: a fundamental disconnect between their patient management systems and their billing infrastructure. "Jacob," I said carefully, "I've been researching Cascade's operational structure, and I think I understand what they actually need." "That's great, sweetheart," he interrupted, still pacing. "But Sam and I have this covered. We've put together a comprehensive strategy that really showcases our expertise." The next evening, Jacob returned from the Cascade meeting looking defeated. He slumped onto the couch, loosened his tie, and stared at the ceiling. "How did it go?" I asked, though his expression already provided the answer. "Disaster. Complete disaster." They listened politely, asked a few questions, then basically told us we didn't understand their real challenges. The CEO said our proposal felt generic and showed no insight into their specific operational constraints. I felt a familiar pang of frustration. "What exactly did you present?" Jacob described their strategy, a standard cost reduction and efficiency optimization plan that could have applied to any healthcare organization. They'd completely missed Cascade's unique infrastructure challenges. "Jacob," I said gently, "what if I told you I think I know exactly what went wrong and how to fix it?" He looked at me skeptically. "Emily, these are complex operational issues. It's not really. Let me show you something." I retrieved my laptop and opened the presentation I'd been secretly developing. For 2 months, I'd been analyzing Cascade Medical's public financial reports, studying their operational data, and developing a comprehensive solution that addressed their actual problems rather than generic healthcare inefficiencies. Jacob's expression changed as I walked him through my analysis. I'd identified the core issue. Their patient management system and billing infrastructure were operating on incompatible platforms, creating a cascade of inefficiencies that cost them approximately $2.3 million annually. My proposed solution involved a staged integration process that would solve their immediate cash flow problems while building toward long-term operational excellence. This is brilliant, Jacob said slowly. How did you figure all this out? Research, analysis. The same skills I've been using to help Morrison and Associates for 15 years. Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then, do you think we could get another meeting with Cascade? Probably. But Jacob, this time I want to be in the room. I want to present this myself. His face immediately clouded. Emily, I appreciate all this work, but client presentations are delicate. There's a psychology to it, a rapport that needs to be established. Maybe we could incorporate some of your insights into our existing framework. No. The word came out more forcefully than I'd intended. Jacob, this isn't your framework modified by my insights. This is my analysis, my solution, my strategy. If Cascade is going to hear it, I need to be the one presenting it. Jacob stood up, his discomfort obvious. Look, I understand you want to be more involved, but there are realities here. Cascade expects to deal with established consultants. People with track records, they don't know you. Then introduce me. Tell them about my background, my expertise, my contributions to Morrison and Associates' success. Emily, you're putting me in an impossible position. I can't just show up with my wife and expect clients to take it seriously. The dismissal was so casual, so automatic, that it took my breath away. 15 years of proving my capabilities, and Jacob still saw me as just his wife, someone whose presence would undermine rather than enhance a business meeting. That night, Jacob called Cascade and scheduled a follow-up meeting. He presented my strategy as his own breakthrough thinking, incorporating new analytical approaches that address their specific challenges. Cascade Medical signed the contract 3 weeks later. The success celebration at the country club was torture. The Cascade Medical celebration party became the night I truly understood how completely I'd been erased from my own life. Jacob had rented the entire upper level of the Harborview restaurant, Portland's most exclusive dining establishment, to celebrate what he called the biggest win in Morrison and Associates history. I watched from a corner table as Jacob held court in the center of the room, surrounded by clients, competitors, and industry journalists who'd come to hear about his revolutionary approach to healthcare consulting. The local business journal was preparing a feature article about his success, and the Portland Business Association had invited him to speak at their annual conference. The breakthrough came when I realized that everyone was treating the symptoms, rather than the disease, Jacob explained to a rapt audience. Healthcare organizations have been so focused on individual inefficiencies that they've missed the systemic integration failures that create those inefficiencies in the first place. My words, my insight, my months of research distilled into a soundbite that made Jacob appear brilliant. Sam Rodriguez approached my table during a lull in the celebration. Jacob's expression changed as I walked him through my analysis. I'd identified the core issue. Their patient management system and billing infrastructure were operating on incompatible platforms, creating a cascade of inefficiencies that cost them approximately $2.3 million annually. My proposed solution involved a staged integration process that would solve their immediate cash flow problems while building toward long-term operational excellence. This is brilliant, Jacob said slowly. How did you figure all this out? Research, analysis. The same skills I've been using to help Morrison and Associates for 15 years. Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then, do you think we could get another meeting with Cascade? Probably. But Jacob, this time I want to be in the room. I want to present this myself. His face immediately clouded. Emily, I appreciate all this work, but client presentations are delicate. There's a psychology to it, a rapport that needs to be established. Maybe we could incorporate some of your insights into our existing framework. No. The word came out more forcefully than I'd intended. Jacob, this isn't your framework modified by my insights. This is my analysis, my solution, my strategy. If Cascade is going to hear it, I need to be the one presenting it. Jacob stood up, his discomfort obvious. The wife of a consulting empire. Not a partner, not a contributor, not even a participant. Just the wife. Someone whose value was entirely derived from her husband's success. And the best part, Maya continued, is that Jacob said you'll finally be able to focus on what you really want to do instead of helping with all that business stuff. He mentioned you've been interested in interior design. How wonderful that you'll have time to pursue your real passions now that the company is taking off. Interior design. I'd mentioned once, months ago, that I found the process of decorating our home office relaxing. Somehow, in Jacob's retelling, this had become my secret dream career, a convenient explanation for why I'd been helping with business stuff that made it sound like I'd been reluctantly filling time until I could pursue my true calling. That sounds lovely, I replied, because what else could I say? How could I explain that my real passion was the strategic thinking and problem-solving that had built Jacob's success? How could I reveal that helping with business stuff was actually my career, my expertise, my contribution to the world? The evening reached its crescendo when Jacob was presented with a Crystal Award recognizing him as Consultant of the Year by the Pacific Northwest Business Alliance. As he accepted the award, he spoke eloquently about innovation, perseverance, and the importance of truly understanding your client's needs. Standing ovation, thunderous applause, photographers capturing the moment for business publications. Excused myself to the restroom and locked the door behind me. In the mirror, I saw a woman I barely recognized, well-dressed, properly made up, smiling appropriately, but completely hollow inside. I'd spent 15 years building someone else's dream while systematically destroying my own identity. When I returned to the party, Jacob was already planning the next phase of his empire, discussing potential acquisitions and market expansion. None of his plans included me, except as the supportive wife who would manage the social aspects of his growing success. I was a ghost, haunting my own life. Even as my marriage disintegrated emotionally, I found myself unable to stop being the invisible force that kept Morrison and Associates functioning. It was as if 15 years of problem-solving had become such an ingrained part of my identity that I couldn't break the pattern, even when I received nothing but dismissal in return. The morning after Jacob's celebration party, I sat in our kitchen, with my laptop, reading the crisis email that had arrived at 3 a.m. Meridian Health Networks, one of Morrison and Associates' major clients, was threatening to terminate their contract due to what they called fundamental failures in project delivery and communication. Jacob was still asleep, probably dreaming about his consulting empire, while his business faced potential catastrophe. The email detailed a litany of problems, missed deadlines, incomplete deliverables, and a complete breakdown in the client relationship. Sam and Harry had been copying Jacob on increasingly desperate messages for 2 weeks, but Jacob had been too busy with celebration dinners and media interviews to notice. By the time Jacob stumbled into the kitchen at 10 a.m., I'd already spent 4 hours developing a crisis management strategy. I'd identified the root causes of Meridian's dissatisfaction, created a recovery timeline, and drafted a presentation that could potentially salvage the relationship. "Morning, sweetheart," Jacob said, pouring coffee and checking his phone. "God, I have 17 missed calls from Sam. Wonder what's got him so worked up." I slid the printed email across the counter. "You might want to read this." Jacob's face went white as he scanned the Meridian termination notice. "This can't be happening. Not now. Not when everything was finally coming together." "Jacob, how long has this been building? These aren't sudden problems. This is the result of weeks of neglect." He ran his hands through his hair, the confident executive from last night replaced by a panicked man facing the collapse of his recent success. "I don't understand. Sam was supposed to be managing the Meridian account. How did it get this bad?" "Sam's been trying to reach you for 2 weeks. You've been too busy with interviews and networking events to respond to his messages. Jacob stared at the email, then at me. Emily, I need your help. I know I can fix this, but I need time to develop a recovery strategy. I already have one. His expression shifted to that familiar mixture of relief and surprise. You do? I opened my laptop and walked him through my analysis. Meridian's complaints weren't about the quality of Morrison & Associates' strategic thinking. They were about execution and communication. Jacob's team had developed good plans but failed to implement them effectively or keep the client informed about progress. This is exactly what they need to hear, Jacob said, studying my proposed recovery plan. How did you put this together so quickly? Because I understand the business, Jacob. I understand clients, project management, crisis communication, all the things you've been telling people I don't really grasp. Jacob had the grace to look uncomfortable. Emily, I never said you didn't understand. Yes, you did. Last night, to Maya Richardson, you explained that I'd finally be able to focus on interior design instead of helping with business stuff. As if the last 15 years of my life were just me killing time until I could pursue my real interests. I was just trying to explain why you'd been so involved in the company. People don't understand why a successful consultant's wife would need to what, Jacob? Need to save your business repeatedly? Need to solve problems you can't handle? Need to work for free while you take credit for everything? He was quiet for a moment, then looked at the recovery plan again. Will you present this to Meridian with me? The question hung between us like a test. After everything, after the years of invisibility, the systematic erasure, the public humiliation, he was asking for my help again. No, I said quietly. I'll give you the strategy, but I won't stand behind you while you present my work as your own. Not anymore. Jacob's jaw tightened. So you're going to let our business fail out of spite? Our business. Even now, even when asking for my help, he couldn't acknowledge that it had always been our business, built on my uncredited contributions. I'm not letting anything fail, I replied. I'm giving you everything you need to succeed. What you do with it is up to you. That afternoon, Jacob presented my crisis recovery strategy to Meridian Health Networks as his own innovative approach to client relationship management. The account was saved, the contract renewed, and Jacob's reputation for quick thinking was further enhanced. I stopped expecting acknowledgement and started documenting everything. The moment that shattered the last remnants of my tolerance came on what should have been one of the happiest days of our marriage, our 15th wedding anniversary. Jacob had planned what he called a milestone celebration at the Riverside Country Club, inviting 40 of our closest friends and business associates to commemorate what he described in the invitations as 15 years of enduring partnership and shared success. I should have known what was coming when I saw the guest list. Every major client, every business contact, every person who mattered to Jacob's professional life was there. Ronald Hartwell, Marcus Webb, Sam Rodriguez, Harry Brennan, the entire ecosystem of Portland's business elite that had watched Jacob rise to prominence over the past decade. What was supposed to be an intimate celebration of our marriage had become another networking opportunity disguised as a personal milestone. The evening began pleasantly enough. Jacob had spared no expense, hiring a small orchestra, arranging for an elaborate 5-course dinner, and even commissioning a professional video montage of our years together. As I watched our history play out on the large screen, our wedding, vacations, business events, holiday gatherings, I felt a flicker of hope that perhaps this night would be different. Perhaps on our anniversary, Jacob would finally acknowledge what we'd built together. The video was beautiful, chronicling our journey from newlyweds to established couple. There were photos of us at business galas, shots of Jacob receiving awards, with me proudly standing beside him, images of dinner parties we'd hosted for his clients. But as I watched, I noticed something troubling. In every business-related photo, Jacob was positioned as the central figure while I appeared as an attractive accessory, always slightly behind him, always smiling supportively, never given equal prominence in the frame. Then came the speeches. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jacob began, standing before our assembled guests with a champagne flute raised, his voice carrying that practiced authority that commanded attention in any room. 15 years ago, I made the smartest decision of my life by convincing this amazing woman to marry me. Polite applause filled the room. I smiled from my seat at the head table, wearing the emerald dress Jacob had specifically requested because it photographed well, expecting the usual blend of affectionate humor and genuine sentiment that marked his better public moments. "What?" "I didn't realize then," Jacob continued, warming to his theme as he always did when he had a captive audience, "was that I wasn't just gaining a wife. I was gaining the perfect business partner. Emily has been the secret to Morrison & Associates' success, though not in the way you might think." My stomach began to clench as I recognized the tone, the subtle shift from celebration to performance. This wasn't going to be recognition. It was going to be another carefully orchestrated presentation designed to enhance Jacob's image while diminishing mine. "You see, Emily has this incredible gift for keeping me grounded," Jacob said, gesturing toward me with the theatrical flair he used during client presentations. "While I'm focused on strategy and vision, developing innovative solutions for our clients, she makes sure I remember to eat lunch, attend important meetings, and maintain some semblance of work-life balance. She's like having a personal assistant and life coach rolled into one beautiful package." Laughter rippled through the crowd, but it felt different from the warm appreciation I'd hoped for. I felt my face burning as Jacob reduced 15 years of strategic thinking, crisis management, and business development to basic personal care services. But more than that, Jacob warmed to his theme, clearly enjoying the attention. "Emily has been my inspiration for understanding what clients really need. Watching her manage our household with such precision, organize our social calendar with military efficiency, and handle all the countless details that keep our life running smoothly has taught me invaluable lessons about operational excellence." He was making me sound like a case study in domestic management, rather than a partner in building his business empire. I watched faces in the crowd. People who had unknowingly benefited from my work, who had praised proposals I'd written, who had signed contracts based on strategies I'd developed, and they were nodding appreciatively at Jacob's description of me as his household management teacher. "In fact," Jacob chuckled, clearly pleased with his cleverness, "some of our most successful consulting methodologies have come from watching Emily organize a dinner party or coordinate a home renovation project. Who knew that household management could be such valuable business training? Sometimes the best insights come from the most unexpected places." The audience was eating it up, delighted by this peek into the secret behind Jacob's consulting success. But I was listening to my husband systematically erase every contribution I'd ever made to his career, while simultaneously claiming that my domestic skills had inspired his professional achievements. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, acknowledging my influence while completely mischaracterizing its nature. "So here's to Emily," Jacob concluded, raising his glass higher with the dramatic flourish of someone delivering a punchline. "My beautiful wife, my inspiration, and my biggest mistake." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Forks clattered against plates. The orchestra continued playing their gentle background music, but the festive atmosphere evaporated in an instant, replaced by shocked silence. "Because," Jacob continued, seemingly oblivious to the devastation he'd just unleashed, his smile fixed in place as if he'd just delivered the world's cleverest joke, "marrying someone this perfect has set an impossible standard. Every other husband here tonight is probably going home wondering why their wives can't be more like Emily. organized, supportive, and content to let their husbands shine. He laughed at his own humor, but the sound was hollow in the sudden quiet. A few people managed nervous, uncomfortable chuckles, but most of our guests sat frozen, unsure whether they'd witnessed a compliment wrapped in an insult or simply witnessed a man publicly humiliate his wife on their anniversary. To Emily, Jacob finished, completely misreading the room. My biggest mistake and my greatest blessing. As glasses reluctantly rose around the room and people murmured confused toasts, I sat perfectly still, my smile frozen in place like a mask. 40 people I'd known for years. People whose children I'd helped with school projects, whose business crises I'd quietly helped resolve, whose dinner parties I'd attended and hosted, had just watched my husband call me his biggest mistake, in front of everyone who mattered to our professional and social lives. The humiliation was complete and public, witnessed by everyone whose opinion could impact our future. And this time, there would be consequences he couldn't imagine. The manila folder in my purse had never felt heavier, and my resolve had never been stronger. The drive home from our anniversary celebration passed in complete silence. Jacob seemed oblivious to the devastation he'd just unleashed, humming along to the radio and occasionally commenting on how well the evening had gone. I stared out the passenger window, watching Portland's city lights blur past, my mind crystallizing around a single unshakable decision. 15 years of documentation, 15 years of saving every email, every bank transfer, every piece of evidence that proved my role in building Morrison & Associates. What had started as careful record-keeping for tax purposes had evolved into something far more comprehensive, a detailed archive of my invisible contributions to Jacob's success. That went really well, don't you think? Jacob said as we pulled into our driveway. I think people were genuinely moved by the speech. Maya Richardson looked like she was about to cry during the toast. Maya Richardson had looked horrified, not moved. But I simply nodded and followed Jacob into our house, my handbag heavy with the folder I'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. That night, while Jacob slept off the celebration champagne, I sat in our home office, the same room where I'd spent countless nights rebuilding his failed proposals, researching his clients' needs, and developing the strategies that had made him famous in consulting circles. I opened my laptop and began the methodical process of compiling 15 years of evidence. The bank statements came first. Every transfer from our joint account to Morrison & Associates when Jacob couldn't make payroll. Every payment I'd made, to vendors when the company's cash flow problems threatened to derail major projects. Every invoice I'd personally settled to maintain relationships with critical suppliers. The amounts were staggering, over $300,000 of my personal inheritance, and salary invested in keeping Jacob's business afloat during crucial early years. Next came the emails. Hundreds of messages between me and Morrison & Associates clients, vendors, and partners. Conversations where I'd solved technical problems, negotiated contract terms, and managed crisis communications while Jacob was unreachable. Email threads that clearly showed me developing solutions, providing analysis, and making strategic recommendations that had saved major accounts. The project files were perhaps the most damning evidence. Every proposal I'd written, every strategy document I'd created, every financial model I'd built, all time-stamped and saved in my personal files. I had draft versions showing my work, revision histories proving my authorship, and follow-up communications where clients specifically praised elements I had developed. The Hartwell contract recovery, entirely my work, completed in a single night while Jacob was drinking away his failure. The Henderson Project salvation during our honeymoon, my research, my financial projections, my client outreach that had secured the deal. The Cascade medical breakthrough that had made Jacob a consulting celebrity, my months of analysis, my strategic insights, my innovative approach to healthcare infrastructure integration. I printed everything: bank statements, Email exchanges, proposal drafts, client testimonials, project timelines, financial models. The pile of documentation grew steadily through the night, creating an irrefutable paper trail of a shadow career that had operated behind Jacob's public success. At 4 a.m., I began organizing the evidence chronologically, creating a narrative that told the true story of Morrison & Associates' growth. Not the myth of Jacob's individual brilliance, but the reality of a partnership where one person did the work while the other took the credit. The manila folder from my purse became inadequate. I needed a proper presentation folder, something substantial enough to contain the weight of truth. I found a leather portfolio case in Jacob's office. Ironically, one I'd given him for his 40th birthday, embossed with his initials. By dawn, I had assembled a comprehensive dossier that documented every significant contribution I'd made to Morrison & Associates over 15 years. Every crisis I'd resolved, every account I'd saved, every breakthrough I'd developed. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and devastating to the narrative Jacob had constructed about his own success. I slipped the portfolio into my handbag and went to shower, preparing for what would be the most important day of my life. Jacob's 45th birthday party was scheduled for that evening, and this time, when he stood before his colleagues and clients to bask in their admiration, he would learn what real mistakes looked like. The truth was about to have its moment, and I was finally ready to claim it. The moment had arrived, and I felt a strange calm settle over me as I stood at the edge of the Riverside Country Club's main dining room. The same ornate space where Jacob had humiliated me 24 hours earlier was now filled with the warm glow of his birthday celebration. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across tables laden with expensive floral arrangements, and the murmur of comfortable conversation created the perfect backdrop for what would become the most important performance of my life. Jacob stood in the center of the room like a king holding court, surrounded by the same group of clients and colleagues who had witnessed my public degradation the night before. He was in his element, confident, charismatic, basking in the attention and admiration that had become as essential to him as oxygen. The man who had called me his biggest mistake was now regaling his audience with stories of his consulting triumphs, completely unaware that his entire world was about to crumble. The secret to success in this business, Jacob was saying to a captivated circle that included Ronald Hartwell, Marcus Webb, and several other prominent business leaders, is understanding that every problem has a solution if you're willing to dig deep enough and think creatively. Too many consultants get trapped in conventional thinking, but breakthrough results require breakthrough approaches. Ronald Hartwell nodded appreciatively, his Scotch glass catching the light as he gestured. That Cascade Medical turnaround you orchestrated was absolutely brilliant, Jacob. The speed and precision of your analysis, the innovative integration strategy, I've never seen anything like it in 30 years of business. It was like watching a master surgeon perform a complex operation. Jacob smiled with practiced modesty, the expression of a man who had grown comfortable accepting praise for achievements that weren't his own. Sometimes the pieces just fall into place when you approach a problem from the right angle. The key is seeing patterns that others miss, understanding the deeper systemic issues rather than just treating surface symptoms. My words, my insights, my months of painstaking research reduced to Jacob's casual wisdom about pattern recognition and systemic thinking. I felt the weight of the leather portfolio in my hands, the same portfolio I'd given him for his 40th birthday, now filled with 15 years of evidence that would destroy every lie he'd just spoken. Jacob, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the conversation despite its steady, measured tone. Could I have a word? The group turned toward me with varying expressions of surprise and curiosity. Jacob's face showed a flicker of concern, perhaps some primitive instinct warning him that danger was approaching, but his public persona remained intact. Emily, sweetheart, he said with that practiced charm that had fooled so many people for so long, I'm just finishing up here with some important discussions. It's important, I interrupted, my voice gentle but absolutely firm. I have something for you, something I think everyone here should see. The conversations around us began to falter as people sensed the undercurrent of tension. Maya Richardson, who had witnessed last night's humiliation with obvious discomfort, looked particularly alert. Sam Rodriguez and Harry Brennan exchanged puzzled glances, clearly uncertain about what was unfolding. Jacob's expression showed growing unease, but he maintained his composure for the watching crowd. Of course, darling. What is it? I stepped forward with deliberate purpose and extended the leather portfolio, the one embossed with his initials, now filled with documentation that would expose him as a fraud. Your birthday gift. I think you'll find it very illuminating. Jacob accepted the portfolio with a confused smile, clearly expecting some sentimental memento or perhaps business documents he'd forgotten about. Emily, you really didn't need to open it, I said simply, my voice carrying a quiet authority that seemed to command the attention of everyone within earshot. Please. Here. Now. The room had grown progressively quieter around us, conversations dying away as people sensed that something significant was about to unfold. Jacob glanced around at the watching faces, clients whose respect he'd worked years to earn, colleagues who looked up to him, competitors who envied his success. Then back at me with growing apprehension. Here? Right now? He asked, his voice betraying the first hint of genuine nervousness I'd seen from him all evening. Yes, Jacob. Right here, right now, in front of everyone who matters. Jacob's hands trembled slightly as he opened the portfolio, his confident facade beginning to crack. The first document that met his eyes was a bank statement from our personal account, showing a $47,000 transfer to Morrison & Associates during one of the company's early financial crises. I watched his face as comprehension dawned, saw the color begin to drain from his cheeks as he realized what he was looking at. Emily, what is this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. But in the growing silence of the room, every word was audible. Keep reading, I replied calmly. Turn the page. He did, revealing another bank statement, then another. Email printouts with timestamps showing me working through the night. Proposal drafts in my handwriting. Client testimonials specifically praising elements I had developed. Project timelines, showing my involvement in every major success Morrison & Associates had achieved. The color continued draining from his face as the scope and implications of the documentation became clear. This is... He started, then stopped, his voice catching in his throat as the magnitude of what he was seeing overwhelmed his ability to process it. 15 years of evidence, I said, my voice steady and clear, carrying to every corner of the now silent room. Every bank transfer I made to keep your company solvent when you couldn't make payroll. Every crisis I solved while you were playing golf with clients. Every proposal I wrote while you took full credit. Every strategy I developed while you presented it as your breakthrough thinking. Every client I saved while you were networking at cocktail parties. The watching crowd had gone completely silent now, the weight of my words sinking in. Ronald. Hartwell stepped closer, trying to see what was in the portfolio. Sam Rodriguez looked bewildered, his understanding of his own company's success suddenly called into question. Harry Brennan's expression was shifting from confusion to dawning, uncomfortable comprehension. You called me your biggest mistake, I continued, my voice carrying the accumulated pain and determination of 15 years. But these documents show the real mistakes, Jacob. Your mistakes. The ones I've been quietly fixing for 15 years. While you built a reputation on my uncredited work? Jacob looked up from the portfolio, his face pale and stricken, sweat beading on his forehead despite the room's comfortable temperature. Around us, 40 of Portland's most prominent business leaders watched in stunned silence as the foundation of Jacob Morrison's carefully constructed reputation began to crack and crumble before their eyes. The silence that followed my revelation was deafening, a void so complete that the soft classical music from the orchestra seemed to echo like thunder. 40 of Portland's most influential business leaders stood frozen in a tableau of shock, watching Jacob Morrison, the man they had celebrated, respected, and envied, holding irrefutable proof that his entire career had been built on someone else's work? Emily. Jacob's voice cracked as he looked up from the portfolio, his face having gone from pale to ashen gray. His hands were visibly shaking now, the leather portfolio trembling in his grip like a living thing. We need to talk about this privately. This isn't the time or place for— No, I said with a firmness that surprised even me. My voice carried across the silent room with crystal clarity. We've had 15 years of private conversations, where you dismissed my contributions, minimized my intelligence, and systematically rewrote the history of our partnership. This time, Jacob, we're having this discussion in front of the people who matter, the people who deserve to know the truth about Morrison and Associates' success. Ronald Hartwell, his face grave with growing understanding, stepped forward with the measured authority of someone accustomed to handling corporate crises. Jacob, what exactly is she talking about? What's in those documents that has you looking like you've seen a ghost? Jacob clutched the portfolio against his chest like a shield, as if he could somehow contain the evidence and prevent it from spilling out into the room. This is a misunderstanding. A massive misunderstanding. Emily has been very supportive over the years, incredibly supportive, but what? I interrupted, my voice gaining strength with each word. But I'm imagining the $300,000 of my personal inheritance and salary that I invested in your company when you couldn't make payroll. But I'm fabricating the hundreds of emails where I solved your clients' problems while you were unreachable. But I'm inventing the proposals I wrote during weekends and holidays while you took full credit? Sam Rodriguez moved closer, his confusion evident in every line of his face. As Jacob's business partner, he had worked alongside Morrison and Associates for years, yet he was clearly seeing a completely different picture than the one he thought he knew. Emily, are you saying that you've been directly involved in our client projects? That you've been working on our proposals and strategies? Jacob never mentioned any of this to us. Of course he didn't, I replied, turning to face Sam directly. Because acknowledging my involvement would have completely undermined the narrative he spent 15 years constructing. The brilliant consultant who single-handedly built Morrison and Associates into a powerhouse. The visionary leader who could solve any business problem through sheer intellect and innovation. Jacob's face flushed red, a stark contrast to his earlier pallor. Emily, you're embarrassing yourself. These people don't need to hear about our personal arrangements, our private— Personal? My voice rose for the first time, cutting through his attempt to diminish what was happening. Jacob, there's nothing personal about business strategy development, financial analysis, and crisis management. There's nothing private about the intellectual property that built your reputation. Unless you consider your entire career to be one big personal fiction. Maya Richardson, who had been watching the exchange with growing horror, spoke up from the edge of the crowd. Emily, what exactly are you claiming here? Help us understand what we're looking at. I turned to face her directly, grateful for someone who was willing to ask the right questions. I'm not claiming anything, Maya. I'm presenting documented evidence. Would you like to see the email chain where I negotiated the Henderson contract? Extension while Jacob was unreachable during a 3-day golf tournament in Scottsdale. Or perhaps you'd prefer to review the financial projections I created for the Cascade Medical proposal, the ones that made Jacob famous throughout the industry. For his innovative healthcare infrastructure insights? Harry Brennan, Morrison and Associates CFO, looked stricken as pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed began falling into place. Emily, if what you're saying is true, if you've been this involved in our work, how did we not know? How did none of us realize that you were? Because Jacob made absolutely certain that you didn't know, I replied, my voice steady despite the emotional weight of what I was revealing. Every time a client praised the quality of Morrison & Associates' work, Jacob accepted full credit without hesitation. Every time someone complimented the detailed analysis or innovative approaches in our proposals, Jacob claimed it was his proprietary methodology. Every time I solved a crisis or saved a major account, Jacob presented it as evidence of his quick thinking and superior business acumen. Jacob finally found his voice again, but it was weak and desperate, the sound of a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. Emily has always been supportive. Incredibly supportive. She's helped with organization, kept me on schedule, managed our social commitments. Organization? I laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Jacob, show them the Meridian Health Crisis Recovery Plan, the one you presented 3 months ago as your breakthrough thinking in stakeholder management. Tell them who actually wrote every word of that presentation. Jacob's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, no words emerging. The portfolio in his hands seemed to grow heavier with each passing second, weighing him down with the accumulated evidence of 15 years of deception. Ronald Hartwell's expression had shifted from confusion to something approaching anger. The look of a man who was beginning to understand that he'd been deceived on a massive scale. Jacob, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with here. Are you telling me that the proposals Morrison & Associates has been submitting to major clients, they weren't actually your work? It's complicated, Jacob stammered. His practiced confidence completely evaporated. Emily and I have always been a team. We've always collaborated. A team? I said sharply, my patience finally exhausted. Jacob, when exactly did you introduce me as your business partner to any of these people? When did you share credit for our successes at industry events? When did you acknowledge my role in building your reputation during any of the countless interviews and articles about Morrison & Associates? The truth hung in the air between us like toxic smoke. Everyone in the room could see Jacob's panic, could witness his complete inability to defend himself against the mountain of evidence I'd presented. The confident consultant who had been holding court just minutes earlier was revealed as something far more troubling, a fraud who had systematically stolen credit for his wife's work while building his career on lies. Last night, I continued, my voice carrying the accumulated pain and righteous anger of 15 years. You called me your biggest mistake in front of all these people. You reduced me to a household manager, someone whose greatest contribution was keeping you organized and on schedule. But the real mistake, Jacob, was thinking you could build a career on deception while erasing the person who made your success possible. Jacob looked around the room desperately, searching faces that had once shown him respect and admiration, now filled with shock, disappointment, and dawning understanding of the scope of his betrayal. I can explain, he whispered. But even he seemed to know that no explanation could undo 15 years of systematic deception. No words could rebuild the trust he had shattered with his lies. What happened next transformed the atmosphere in the room from shock to something approaching. Revolution. Ronald Hartwell, one of Portland's most respected business leaders, stepped forward and gently took the portfolio from Jacob's trembling hands. May I? He asked, looking at me rather than Jacob. I nodded. Please. Everyone should see what's in there. As Hartwell began examining the documents, other guests moved closer. Sam Rodriguez peered over his shoulder, his expression growing more troubled with each page. Harry Brennan shook his head in disbelief as he recognized emails he'd received from me over the years. Emails he'd assumed were coming through Jacob. My God, Hartwell muttered, looking up from a bank statement. Emily, this shows you personally funded Morrison & Associates payroll during their cash flow crisis in 2019. That's over $80,000. And here, Sam said, pointing to an email thread, this is Emily corresponding directly with our Henderson contact about technical specifications. I remember Jacob presenting these solutions to us as his breakthrough analysis. Maya Richardson moved closer to examine the documentation. Emily, this email is timestamped at 3 a.m. on a Saturday. You were working on Jacob's business at 3 a.m. Many Saturdays, I replied simply. Many 3 a.m.s. While Jacob was sleeping, I was solving the problems that would make him look brilliant on Monday morning. The crowd continued to pass the documents around, and with each revelation, the murmur of conversation grew louder. Business leaders who had known Jacob for years were discovering that the man they'd respected and admired had been perpetrating a massive fraud, not just on his clients but on the entire business community. "This changes everything," Hartwell said grimly, looking directly at Jacob. "Morrison, I've recommended your services to dozens of companies based on what I believed was your personal expertise. Are you telling me that none of that work was actually yours?" Jacob's mouth moved soundlessly. His face had gone from pale to gray, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Answer him, Jacob," I said quietly. "Tell Mr. Hartwell who really developed the cost reduction strategy that saved his company $2.3 million last year." We, Jacob stammered, then fell silent. "It was Emily," Sam Rodriguez said suddenly, his voice filled with dawning realization. "Jesus Christ, Jacob. It was Emily all along. The financial models, the risk assessments, the client relationship strategies. She was your secret weapon, and you never told us." "Not a secret weapon," I corrected. "A partner. An uncredited, unacknowledged, unpaid partner whose contributions you systematically erased while building your reputation on her work." The revelation was spreading through the room like wildfire. Guests who had been celebrating Jacob's success an hour earlier were now looking at him with disgust and betrayal. The man they had admired as a business genius was revealed to be something far more troubling, a fraud who had stolen credit for his wife's achievements while publicly humiliating her. "Emily," Maya Richardson said, her voice filled with awe and apology. "I owe you an enormous apology. We all do. When Jacob talked about you being interested in interior design, when he described you as just providing organizational support, my God, he was deliberately hiding your real contributions." "The question now," Ronald Hartwell said, his tone businesslike and stern, "is what we do with this information. Jacob, you've built your entire professional reputation on work that wasn't yours. You've accepted awards, speaking engagements, and business opportunities under false pretenses." Jacob finally found his voice, but it was weak and desperate. "Please, let's not make this bigger than it needs to be. Emily and I can work this out privately." "Privately?" I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "Jacob, you called me your biggest mistake in front of 40 people last night. You spent 15 years publicly diminishing my intelligence while privately depending on it to build your career. This stopped being private the moment you decided to humiliate me in front of everyone who matters to our professional lives." The room erupted in supportive murmurs. For the first time in 15 years, I wasn't standing alone. The truth had witnesses, advocates, and believers, and Jacob Morrison's house of lies was finally collapsing around him. 6 months later, I stood in my new office overlooking the Columbia River, reviewing the final contracts for Parker Consulting Solutions, my own firm, built on my own reputation, bearing my own name. The irony wasn't lost on me that after 15 years of being invisible, I was now one of the most sought-after business consultants in the Pacific Northwest. The aftermath of that night at the Riverside Country Club had been swift and decisive. Within a week, 3 major clients had terminated their contracts with Morrison & Associates, specifically requesting to work with me directly. The Portland Business Journal ran a feature story titled, "The Hidden Genius Behind Morrison's Success," and suddenly, everyone wanted to know Emily Parker Morrison, though I'd legally returned to my maiden name by then. Jacob's business didn't survive the scandal. Sam and Harry had tried to salvage the company, but the damage to Morrison & Associates' credibility was irreversible. When clients discovered that the strategic thinking they'd been paying premium rates for had actually come from someone who'd never been officially part of the company, the lawsuits began. Jacob declared bankruptcy within 4 months. My phone buzzed with a text from Ruby Chen, my new business partner and former client who'd approached me after reading about the Morrison scandal. The Meridian Health presentation went perfectly. They want to sign a 3-year contract. Welcome to the big leagues, partner. I smiled, thinking about how different this success felt from the hollow victories of my marriage. Every client who praised my work knew exactly who had done it. Every contract signed bore my name. Every strategy session featured me as the primary consultant, not as someone's hidden asset. The divorce had been surprisingly straightforward. Jacob's assets were mostly tied up in the failed business and mounting legal fees, while I had documented proof of my financial contributions to his company. My lawyer had been particularly interested in the portfolio of evidence I'd compiled, not just for the divorce proceedings, but as a case study in intellectual property theft. Mrs. Morrison, he'd said during one of our meetings, what your husband did to you represents a form of professional exploitation that's more common than people realize. Your documentation is so thorough that we could pursue this in civil court if you wanted to. But I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition. And I was getting it in ways I'd never imagined possible. The knock on my office door interrupted my thoughts. Maya Richardson entered, looking sheepish but determined. Emily, I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced. I've been wanting to talk to you for months. Of course, I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. What can I do for you? Maya settled into her seat, then looked directly at me. I want to apologize, not just for that night at the club, but for 15 years of not seeing what was right in front of me. All those dinners, all those parties where Jacob talked about his success while you sat quietly. We should have known. We should have asked better questions. I considered her words carefully. Maya, Jacob was very good at controlling narratives. He made sure everyone saw what he wanted them to see. But we were complicit, she insisted. We accepted his version of reality because it was easier than questioning it. When someone presents themselves as successful and confident, we tend to believe them, even when the evidence suggests otherwise. She was right, of course. Jacob's deception had been successful partly because people wanted to believe in his success story. It was easier to accept his version of events than to dig deeper and discover uncomfortable truths. The business community has learned something valuable from your situation, Maya continued. We're asking different questions now, looking more carefully at who's really doing the work behind the success stories we celebrate. I nodded. That's the real victory, isn't it? Not just personal vindication, but systemic change. As Maya left, I returned to my window overlooking the river. In the distance, I could see the Riverside Country Club where everything had changed. The woman who had sat in the back row, accepting humiliation as the price of love, was gone. Her place stood someone who had learned the most important lesson of her life. The truth doesn't need permission to exist, but it does need advocates to speak it. And sometimes, the most powerful advocate for your truth is yourself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.